Here it goes. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining. So we'll call to order last month, October 25th meeting minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the meeting minutes? Oh, actually, I should do attendance first. Sorry, I'm all out of sorts. We'll do attendance first. So Bill Lesage, present.
Peter Eckel, BAC, present.
And
Brad Power, Community Development Department.
Tyson Thornburg, Budget and Financial Analyst.
Jackie Lowe, Finance Director.
Jenny Nolan, Budget Administrator. And then online we have
Josh Newell, present.
Present.
all right. So now I was so excited to approve the minutes. Now we can move on. Do we have a motion to approve last month's October 25th meeting minutes?
Motion to approve.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? All right, here.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? All right. Okay, so today, Director Power is with us today to talk through the local economy. And I think that's other than Member's Choice, I think that's our only item this week or this month, so.
So I have all the time in the world, is that?
Yeah, you can take it all.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Brad Power. I'm the Director of the Community Development Department, and it's nice to be back with you. I think this is either the fourth or fifth time we've done this, so I appreciate you having me back. And I always get excited to talk about my passion, which is leading the Community Development Department and the 16 other professionals that work with me every day. You'll get a sense of what we do as we go through the presentation. Next slide. So we want to try to accomplish three things this evening. Talk a little bit about how we interact with particularly the economy section of the city's strategic plan. And then talk a little bit about the department and its goals, objectives, and some of the budget items that we have going this year. And then I know that there was a specific request to talk about the status of the CityCenter redevelopment project, so I'll be glad to do that as well. So in terms of local economy outcome area, you can see that this is the outcome statement that resides in the city's strategic plan. And I'll just say that our entire economic development effort that you'll hear a little bit more about is focused on the existing businesses and attracting, promoting new business ventures. And we especially want to pay extra attention, I think I've mentioned this before, to our small scale business and entrepreneurial community, which is the heart and soul of the people who are doing business in this community. 75% of the employers in this town employ fewer than 10 people. So we've really tried to gear our support efforts to that part of our business community. So here's some of the outcome areas that we've compared to in terms of benchmarking with other communities. And you can our overall scores, so to speak, are pretty analogous to the communities that our survey compares us to. So you can see some of the trends in terms of the overall economic health is trending marginally upward. Hopefully that improves when we do the next survey coming out of the COVID experience. Our economic development, I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of our strategic plan that has some specific goals in terms of how we market our plans and our programs to the community that hopefully takes that score up. And then you can see some of the others in terms of the variety of businesses, the vibrancy of the downtown is starting to improve. The fact that we now have the Downtown Development Authority, I think, is going to improve that score even more in the future years based on the investments that they're able to make. Goes along with the vibrancy. Englewood is a place to work and employment opportunities. Obviously, there's some room for improvement in employment opportunities, but people work all over the place now based on the COVID experience. So we're all endeavoring to do different things in terms of how we spend our work day. But it is somewhat gratifying to know that we're on par with our peer communities in terms of this specific outcome area for the strategic plan. Slide. I won't go through this. One, because the type is incredibly small, but suffice it to say, our department is really the lead department when it comes to this specific area of the strategic plan. And as I alluded to before, a lot of what we're doing is trying to improve and maintain our business climate here, specifically for that segment of the community that is the bread and butter of our local economy. So we have our entire economic development program is geared toward providing a leg up, either at the beginning of a business in Englewood, so they can come to us and get a $5,000 grant to start and establish their business. We have certain requirements around that in order to access those funds. And if they've been here for a while, they want to take the next step and expand. We have up to a $10,000 grant for some type of physical improvement. So they have to have a physical location. It can't be a home-based business. They have to attract that type of interaction on the street, so to speak. And then we have all types of training programs. We're really proud of the fact that we've established 11 partnerships with regional and local other economic development organizations. So locally in Englewood, that includes the Chamber of Commerce. It obviously includes the Downtown Development Authority. And more regionally, our biggest partner is the Aurora South Metro Small Business Development Center, which sponsors and co-hosts with us a lot of our training programs. A lot of that shifted online over the course of the last 2 years. Some of that's starting to come back. So we did a couple of job fairs for especially challenged populations. We did 2 of those this year. So those are some of the things that we try to do to operationalize the economy portion of strategic.
Brad, if it's okay if I just
Oh, of
add
course.
quickly about the structure. So one of the conversations Brad and I had about the last iteration of the strategic plan is I think his department had about 40 projects, but most of them weren't discrete in terms of they were really more statements about aspirational type statements. And so what we did is we retooled this section. One of the big changes we made is we actually dropped the local. It was a decision by council to focus more on kind of a more just focus on economy, including global economy and things like that. And then number 2, we transitioned a lot of the projects, quote unquote, that really weren't discrete projects into performance metrics. And so we have only 8 projects here, but many of them are big ticket items in terms of developing new initiatives and new programs. But we decided it's really important, especially in this space, to monitor how well we're doing things. And so we decided to add 10 new performance metrics that Brad's department tracks that are actually now part of a citywide performance dashboard on the city's website. And that we'd be happy to go over with you at some point. But these are, especially so when we look at things like business climate or business retention, there are a few projects, but primarily it's focused on measuring basically like things like number of new businesses, number of building permits issued, meetings with property owners about why properties are vacant. And so we wanted to make sure that we were measuring how well we were doing existing recruitment or retention initiatives. Is that right, Brad?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for that addition. Appreciate it. So this is our mission statement for the department, and I'll just kind of summarize that by saying the easiest way how I describe what we do is anything that touches the built environment in Englewood, especially investment by the private sector, we either regulate or promote. So we regulated on the planning side through our zoning ordinances. We've regulated on the building side through the building codes and building inspections. And we promote it on the economic development side by trying to expand and retain the business base in the community. So all that investment that's turning through Englewood in the built environment, we have some role in that at some point in the process. Slide. So in terms of what we've been working on so far this year has been the year of the big projects for our department. In addition to all the daily work that comes in. So all the development applications that come in, and that could be for a backyard fence. And there's a public hearing tonight at Planning and Zoning Commission for a 300 unit planned unit development down off of Oxford, and everything in between that you can think of in terms of development applications. We see those as a course of our regular business. And we inspect everything that's being built in the community. We were closing in on almost 6,000 building inspections between three guys and now two this year, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So it's pretty busy out there just from the day-to-day things. But in terms of some of the larger projects that we've been working on, and some of the other initiatives, 15 years ago, the city did what was known as the Walk and Weevil Master Plan update. This was kind of part of our previous comprehensive plan. This is the city's multimodal plan. It's master plan for the future. Thanks, Tim.
I'll kind
While
of
you're
jump on.
coming. So walking, biking, sidewalk improvements, that whole public realm, we did an update to that that the city council approved a little bit earlier this year. So that starts to guide some of the things that we look at in terms of the plans and people who are coming in for development. We can kind of hold them to those plan provisions, because we want to invest in terms of our capital program and other things that are happening in the downtown core area to make sure that we have a really well-connected city. We want to connect this area to the South Broadway area and to the hospital area. And that's a real series of goals that the Downtown Development Authority really has too. Now we have a backbone from which to hang some of those objectives. We're very proud of the fact that last week, City Council adopted unanimously the city's first economic development strategic plan. And so when I arrived here 6.5 years ago, our economic development program was really geared toward the old school chasing retailers, which is what a lot of cities traditionally had done. And there's not a lot of retail being built anywhere, and there's really not a lot of opportunity in this community because the market is kind of closed for huge mega mall type developments. That's just not the business that Englewood is in anymore. So I sat down with our economic development manager, Darren Hollingsworth, and my boss at the time, and we had this discussion around where should we go? And that's when we pivoted to this kind of local focus and small business focus. And so we wanted to say, okay, that program is 5 years old now. Where do we want to go? And so we worked with a steering committee from business people from the community, some staff members from internally. And we had a consultant from Denver, Economic and Planning Systems. And we wanted to kind of compare ourselves with other places in the metro area in terms of how we're orienting our business development retention programs and just kind of where we stood. And then we wanted to take a look 5 to 10 years into the future about where we should start to be evolving. And the long and the short of it is, I would commend you to look at it. It's on our Englewood Invest website. It's pretty extensive. There's a lot of interesting goals there, but a couple of takeaways are that we're doing things really well. We got really good feedback from the business community. The one area that we want to improve is how we're reaching out and how we're spending time in the community. Make sure people know that these programs exist, because the people have taken advantage of them. They've been highly satisfied, but we just need to reach in more in depth. So we're creating more of those partnerships with the DDA, with the chamber, so that we can utilize their networks to penetrate the community more effectively, to gather more clients and have more interactions and more opportunities with that. So that was a major initiative for us this year, and we just got it approved last week. So we're really, really proud of that. We're rewriting our entire development code. It's been 20 years since Englewood rewrote everything that regulates how development happens in the community, which is not unusual for communities. It's kind of a generational thing that they do. So it's been 20 years for us. Usually it's 15 to 20 years. So we're about, I would say, 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through that project, which is looking at everything that gets built and regulated here. So it's a document. If you looked at the paper version, it's probably that thick in terms of its formal title is Title 16 in our development, in our unified code in Englewood. So we're working with a Kansas City-based consultant that has expertise around the country looking at these types of codes. And we're working through with a steering committee of citizens, 5 citizens in our entire Planning and Zoning Commission serve as that steering committee. They've been meeting for months, twice a month, to go through a very painstaking review of the code. So we're now at the point where we're actually drafting new provisions. So we've spent the last 2 study sessions with City Council, including last night, to get their review of what some of these provisions may be. And one of the really interesting areas that is emerging, and I'll talk about this in terms of the challenges, is where are we going with housing in this community, especially from an affordability standpoint. And I think the council is going to have a really interesting discussion on the 28th around where do we want to shift to try to have certain parts of the community be more receptive to particularly affordable housing, because we have none of that now. It's a wide open field for it. So we're excited about that project. Related to that as well is we got a grant from the state, the Department of Local Affairs, granted us $80,000 in December of last year. We matched it for a housing needs assessment. So we've been working with a Denver-based consultant to look at options for that housing discussion. And we're kind of folding it into our code process so that we can recommend to council some changes that they may want to incorporate into the code so that we'll have the ability to have those housing objectives met from that assessment. Sorry for the jargon, but E3 stands for Energy Efficiency Englewood. And that's a program that's federally funded. We have our community development block grant funds that we receive every year. It's about $150,000. That helps 10 to 12 income qualified families improve their homes from an energy standpoint. So that could typically is new furnaces, more efficient furnaces, and new windows. That's kind of the two big things that we do through that program. And then we also have the home repair improvement program that is also income qualified for people that have like sidewalk repairs or sewer lines to the streets or those types of things, roofs. So we help about 10 to 12 folks in that program per year as well. This one is kind of some of the back of the house, but very important. Our building codes. We tend to update those every 3 to 4 years. And so we're working on the 2021 building code, which will be submitted to council early part of next year and take effect in the early summer of next year. As you can see in Englewood, there's a lot of construction going on. So as I said, we've done year to date almost 6,000 separate inspections of the work. And we have a very key vacancy right now. I'll touch on this in terms of some of the challenges. We are down a building inspector. So our 2 other inspectors are kind of picking up the load. They've actually gotten more efficient in terms of how they're visiting some of the properties. So they've been able to maintain the workload despite the high demand. I'll just say CityCenter is obviously a big thing. I'll talk about that specifically in a minute. And then we secured a 100% grant for $50,000 for a planning grant to look at the Little Dry Creek area that's just to the east of us in Englewood Parkway from a planning and improvement standpoint, so we can make those key connections between here and particularly the downtown. So we're just now starting that work. We've done 3 years of our Citizens Planning School, which is a 6-week planning academy in the fall. That ranges from the first week as we take everybody out on the rec bus. They look at different developments in town to how zoning and planning works. I conduct an exercise with them where they're in charge of redeveloping and building about a 5-block area of a mythical city with Legos that are different color codes, and they build their plan and they have to defend it. They have to I get to play the mayor at the end, which is always very nice because I get to pick apart their projects. But we do that every year now, and it's really well received, and we've had some really great folks that participated, particularly this year. So that just wrapped up in latter part of last month. And then one of the things that's really important to me personally as a director is I like to look face to face into the eyes of our customers in 3 of our areas, building, planning, and economic development. So 3 times a year, once each for each of those. We invite people in at breakfast time, and we just spend an informal hour, and I ask them with our requisite managers of each of those areas, how are we doing? What's going well with us in terms of your interaction? What are some things that you see? A lot of folks that we work with, they work up and down the Front Range and in other communities. I ask them, so are there things that we can learn from other communities that maybe in terms of how we do things and how we approach things? So we've done the building one. The economic development is on Thursday, and then planning will be in December. So a little bit later than usual this year, but we've had a busy year. But it's always nice to see those folks. And I think one of the things that I think is just a measure of respect for the people who do business here. And one of the things that was really gratifying in our building meeting in the spring, A gentleman has been a contractor up and down the Front Range for 40 years. Came up to me afterwards and said, I've been in this business 45 years and I can count on less than one hand how many times somebody has asked my opinion about how we work with the community. That means a lot to me, to reach out that way. So we do that every year. And then finally, the other thing that we're really, really proud of is I think last year and maybe even the year before, I mentioned the fact that we've had an amazingly robust COVID business response program. We've consumed almost 1.5 million of the federally backed monies to do that. We've done 550 separate grants for businesses, over 12 grant programs. We're still doing one that's called Refresh and Renew for people to just kind of clean up their businesses. We were able to do 40 of those with the money that we had left, and that'll close out and be done at the end of December. But one of the things we're really gratified about is we won a statewide downtown Colorado Governor's Award for our COVID response over the course of the last couple of years. We picked up that award in April. So very proud of that. Next slide. So in terms of some of the expenditures for this year, one of the things that you can see there in terms of the top line, we've had some vacancy. I talked about our building inspector. That's now been vacant for about 3.5 months. Building inspectors, if you know anybody in the construction trades who is qualified, send them our way because they are a literally aging out segment of a very critical role in communities. Every community is just strapped for this type of skill. And so it usually is people come out of the trades and they kind of, ascend in a little bit of a training curve for us to be able to put them out in the field. They have to get certain certifications to do that. And a lot of these people are aging. They're all one cohort and they all kind of came in together and they're all aging out together. And there are very few people behind that are younger and capable of doing it. So we've had a challenge with this one. So you can see that's the basis of most of that salary savings. Some of the other salary savings is we've had a couple of replacement employees that replace senior people, so they came in a little bit more junior level.
So real quick, so it's not necessarily, because I know we heard a lot, especially last year, about, salaries and being competitive. So it's not, so in this case, it's not so much that as it is, there's just not a workforce out there for this role.
Yeah, that's one of the key challenges is just finding the qualified people that are available to do it. Now, maybe as the economy slows down a little bit, there'd be more interest from people from the trades, but that hasn't happened yet. We're still seeing a lot of development activity here. So our commodities expenditures are pretty close to the budget. Contractual is professional services. That number is really pretty much related to the fact that we're now in a pause, let's say, in CityCenter, which I'll speak about in a little bit more in depth. And that's really from unexpended funds around legal and our financial consulting services for that project, because we didn't get to the point with our developer, which is now withdrawn, to an actual master development agreement. So that would have been soaking up a lot of that expenditure. And then capital, you can see we're a little bit under because we had some new employees join us that we did some furniture purchases around that. So you can see where we're shaping up in terms of our budget. Next slide. So in terms of challenges faced, not so much as a department, but maybe as an organization is, in this time of kind of economic uncertainty, I think a lot of us ask ourselves, are we headed to a soft landing or is the slope steeper? And I'm hopeful that in Colorado's more diversified economy now, we'll be on that more soft landing stage because there's a lot more going on in this metro area in terms of the breadth and depth of industry that we used to be in Colorado. So I'm old enough to remember the huge swings in when Denver and this area is a little bit more energy dependent and, the revenues and communities just, went off the cliff. Hopefully we're trending toward somewhat of an easing of inflation next year. We can maintain. What I can say is the amount of development that's in this community. We still have things in the pipeline. Obviously, there's a lot of development that's been recently approved that's either close to coming out of the ground or just now starting to come out of the ground. A lot of that is multifamily housing. But that'll be another 2 or 3 years of construction activity in the community. I mentioned this earlier, accelerating housing costs, not only, along the Front Range, but obviously in Englewood. So through that code project, we're having discussions with the city council around what are the goals and the requirements possibly down the line for obtaining additional affordable housing in this community so that we're housing more of the demographic cohort that we want to have here, which is, everyone. And that's increasingly challenging. The younger you are, the harder it is, either to rent, let alone buy. So we're addressing that. City Center, again, I keep teasing this, but I swear it's going to be on the next slide, that we're going to be requiring more time to position this project for its future. And then I mentioned our staffing challenges, market competitiveness, retention. We're doing the salary work and the citywide work on that. I think that'll help a lot. Our department has been very fortunate. We've had fairly low turnover throughout the last 2 or 3 years, but we've had a couple of key positions change this year. Unfortunately, other than the building inspector, we've had really good people that came in. But we've been, I'm knocking on wood, we've been really stable as a department since I've been here. So I'm pretty pleased by that. That's great. Okay, next slide.
Well, one question on
Sure.
the,
Yeah, maybe this is a good spot to pause in terms of before we shift to City Center, maybe talk about where we are as a department and any of the financial things that you're interested
so with the, I don't know if I'll phrase this correctly, but with the increased demand in, building in Englewood, housing and otherwise, has that led to increased fees, to help your department in, not only the staffing side of it, but I mean, redoing your whole code is no easy task either and all that. So has that led, and is there any benefit there, or is that something you looked at?
Yeah, I would say the last 3 years of construction activities, our fee remittance has been very healthy.
Yeah.
It's far exceeded what we've done in terms of our staff cost, even our consultants. We have a consultant on our building side that provides backup to our staff, and they also do our very complex commercial building reviews. So we have a contract with them. Our fee remittance has been far beyond those expenses. So it's been a really robust time in terms of our fee collection.
And has there been, have we increased fees or anything like that?
We did it 2 years ago, and then our fees will go up again January 1st, 23.
Great, thanks.
So we did 21 and we did 20, beginning of 21 and then beginning of 23. Okay, we'll shift to City Center. So as way of background, City Center is 22 years old, and it was the first so-called transit-oriented development, or TOD development, in the entire RTD light rail system. So this project was very much a pioneer, but it was also very much of its time. And the two things that happened during the first round of City Center was there's obviously the goal of putting housing next to the transit. So you see the 2 apartment buildings. But the interesting thing was the city wanted at that time, and the development community was still in the process of building so-called power centers, which were things like Walmart and the boxes that are along Hampton. That's been the challenge the last 10 years, is that type of retail has either moved elsewhere, or more often than not, in a lot of communities, it's just fallen out of favor. And so you see the vacancies. You see the vacancies climbing in even some of the smaller stores. One of the things that I think was operationally challenging around City Center 22 years ago is they made it convenient for the commuters to not have to visit any of the retail or any of the other parts of City Center, because they put the parking right next to the rail. So you could either get off the train or the bus, go to your car, and you're out. So, it didn't have a 50-year life cycle that people expected. It had about a 15-ish year life cycle. The residential that's here, that's great, but it's not serving enough, there's not enough people here to make it as vibrant as it could be. So one of the things that happened, and you're probably aware of this, is a lot of the retail that fronts Hampton, the original developer that built that 22 years ago, Weingarten, which were local larger development company, they walked away from a balloon payment in 2018 of about $18 million in debt on the property. So we went into bankruptcy. So we thought at that point, that's a good time to say, all right, what's CityCenter's next 50 or 100 years? Because we have this opportunity to think about this part that's not doing well. What do we want to do? So we opened up discussions with the receiver of the Weingarten property, which is still in place. It's been in place for about 4 years. And the city, through the Englewood Environmental Foundation, owns a whole bunch of this site and the parking lot to the north, and, you know, the oval outside. So we thought, let's combine all of that kind of core area of CityCenter. The apartments will stay, but let's think about the next 50 or 100 years here. And let's try to do something to put it on a different path. So we did a national RFP for developers, and we had some interesting responses. We had one that was semi-local from Fort Collins and SKB from Portland, Maine, Portland, Oregon, that has had experience in this transit-oriented development and repositionings of properties. And I won't get into the details, but this is an incredibly complex real estate puzzle. Because the way it was wound together 20 years ago through a long-term ground lease that the city got the entire 75 years payment up front, that's really hard to unwind. Because what we have to talk to the city council about now is the possibility of putting the private sector in control of owning and redeveloping from this point forward versus a long-term ground lease. A long-term ground lease was great for the retail because those retailers are thinking, I'll be there 30 or 40 years. I'm not going to be there 75 years. 75-year ground lease, that's great. When you want to build apartments or condos or hotels or offices, it's a whole different ballgame with investors. So we had to figure that out. So we worked with SKB for over 3 years of trying to put together a master development agreement for this site that would do several things. It would triple the number of people living here. And that is something like RTE likes to hear that, because that means they might be willing to play ball and lower the amount of parking if they can get that density. It means things like a hotel. Hotel is, you know, something that we think is really would be a phenomenal use here. Even with people who have business in downtown Denver, it's 20 minutes away. Offices, more places to interact, a better public realm here that's more discoverable and cherished and kind of feels owned. These wide open, paved, semi-green spaces, they just don't have the number of people here to be successful. So we got pretty far along the road with SKB around those types of agreements. The DDA came along in 21 and 22. In the first vote in downtown, the DDA was created. And then a second vote, the folks who could vote in the DDA, they authorized up to $70 million in debt financing over the next 30 years of their existence for the entire DDA, which stretches from here to the hospitals. So a chunk of that, to be determined, would be devoted here to the public realm. So that would be parking, it would be plazas, it would be open space, that whole connective tissue, what would weave into the project. So that's a huge thing that didn't exist. The other thing is we rezoned this whole area. It used to be very limited because it was known as a planned unit development. So it was very specified on what could happen. And it was 22 years old. So it's not contemporary at all. So we got rid of that and we rezoned it the same zoning as the downtown core. So we could essentially have the scale of a downtown that stretches from here to the hospitals. So we did that as well. So what happened? Okay, so we're trending along with SKB and we were getting further and further down the road, but then conditions started changing. The EDDA, rightly so, didn't exist when we selected SKB. So the DDA was like, well, how's this plan going to come together? What's our role in investing? How much would it be? And so that opened up a chain of discussions around what level of investment would that have required? And so that was one of the things that the SKB started to feel uncertain about. I think the DDA is very much willing to invest in the outcome here. They just wanted to know at what scale, what would be that purchase, so to speak, in terms of that public realm, public investments. So that started to become a little bit of a back and forth that SKB, from their perspective, they started to get a little bit nervous about. And then the other thing is, they had a schedule that would require the public financing to be in place, the development review from my shop to be done in terms of the project, and all the other agreements that the city require to all be in place by this time next year. And they started looking at their schedule thinking, I don't know, that might be a stretch. The other thing is obviously is the national economy is softening and the demand is an issue. But the biggest issue for them was the cost of money. So they started looking at that in terms of the investment that would be required here. And so they took a look at the whole menu of things and just thought, you know what? There's too much risk for them at this point in time to go forward. So in early October, they notified us that they were pulling out. So one of the things that we have to do now is we're in a kind of a regroup, which I think maybe this is, you think this would be self-interested for me to say, but I'll reinforce this in my last bullet. We learned a lot and we did a lot in the last couple of years. And one of the things we want to do now is to say, okay, time out. So to the city council and the DDA, what are your genuine objectives here? There's a lot that's been discussed about, a lot, but we didn't reduce it to an agreement. So what we want to do is take a step back. So in mid-February, we're going to meet all day on a Saturday with both the city council and the DDA and have a visioning session on this area so that we can establish some new ground rules of what the city's objectives for this area. We'll then take that information and work with that special servicer that controls the former part of the property and market this opportunity again nationwide and put it out for interest for folks. There is a lot of inherent interest as this place is a property, as a real estate proposition. It just has to work financially. And it just didn't work for our partner at this point in time. So, that's fair enough. There's others out there. So we'll probably do that mid part of next year. We'll put this out for interest and see what we get. So the last line, this is not at all unusual. I've been in redevelopment my entire career. And one of the things I did is I worked for the city of Boulder for 18 years. And we have a downtown hotel public-private partnership project. If you're familiar with the community, the St. Julian Hotel, which is an anchor, just a jewel in the downtown, that took 3 developers. We got done on its 3rd developer. So these types of really complicated real estate projects, they take the time that they need to happen. And we've learned, as I said, we've learned a lot. We know what to do. We know some of the things not to do. And I think we're really energized by getting a new fresh look from the DDA and the city council of saying, think about these things. It won't be cheap. Dreams will cost us here in terms of that public realm. We'll have to invest in the outcome because the thing I hate the most about my job is where do you put the cars? Parking. It's so insane in terms of the drive part of the pump, but driving outcomes in terms of the built environment. We want to do something creative here. We want to pull people off the trains and the buses into the project so they get to their cars by passing Nixon's or passing other places. People on the street, it's more defensible, it's safer. So we want to learn some of those lessons from 22 years ago that weren't so much on the front burner. And really make this 50 to 100-year success. And one of the ways you do that is, as I said earlier, we put a lot more housing here. We put a hotel here. Those types of things are not susceptible to the ups and downs and the whims of the retail market. They are stable. They are long-term. They are built, better than these types of, this is like a 40-year building. It's 30, almost 40-something years old. And it has issues. And that's one of the other things that I didn't mention, which is the future of this building. This building happens to sit on the most valuable part of the real estate of this entire area. So we want to have these discussions around, does the city, replace its use either next door to 24-hour fitness, or do we build a purpose-built building for the new city hall? Those are the types of things that we'll reconnect with the DDA and the council on in the wintertime to confirm, because the market's going to want to know that. The market's going to want to know if this building doesn't go away, if people have to build around it, it's going to impact what types of interest we get here. I'll be really honest in saying that. But if the city says, you know what, we're open-minded to a solution that might be creative, inventive, city definitely wants to have a big role here. But does it have to be in this specific? So again, I'd be happy to take any questions, but that's a little bit about kind of where we've come from and kind of where we're going with this area. I would say in terms of what it set us back, it's probably about a year in terms of trying to get to that part where we were on the precipice of getting a negotiated agreement for going forward. Didn't quite happen, but hopefully this time next year we'll have a new partner, be able to have those discussions going forward.
Yeah, your last point there, I know like something, at least from this committee, is we, when we were going through the budget and the capital projects last year, it was looking at anything that came up around this building and kind of city hall was like, well, how much do you want to put in that? And from a community perspective, it's like, well, things might change here. So that's good to know, I mean, I know we don't have any answers yet, but I think that helps us,
Yeah, and I would say even if we have a new development partner next year, we're probably 3 years away from getting out the silver shovels and having that celebration the day that the first project comes up. The other thing that I could promise is, CityCenter kind of landed all at once 22 years ago. This will be phased. So it'll probably be a 5 to 10 year build out period, which is actually not a bad thing because, the markets will prove themselves over time. And again, I think we will inject a lot more very stable uses here that are here now. Walmart's kind of doing their own thing. They have their stores, very successful. They also own their real estate, whereas everything else is on this long-term lease. And it's just had its day. It's tired. It needs to be replaced. And there's a lot of demand for people to live in these rail served and bus served areas. That in turn brings, as I said before, people want to be outside walking their dogs at 10 at night. So it's a lot safer area. More restaurants, more that type of thing that would attract people from all over the city. One of the things I think the council and the EDDA is interested in is what can we do to make this more reflective of Englewood? And that's one of the things we're really interested in hearing from them in February is what is that character that we want to try to inject into the outcome here.
I appreciate your presentation. I was born and raised here. I left for many years, lived in a city called Atlanta, Georgia, and in a city in Louisiana in my adult life, and moved back here a few years ago. But I moved to Englewood because I wanted to be here for many reasons. But one, I commend the sort of patient decision-making, and especially given what's going on in the economy and certainly rates and some other things in the construction and real estate world. And you're right, I mean, this property it's definitely tired. So I guess, of course, I assume this goes well into the 9-digit figure over whatever phases that need to be.
Yeah, SKB thought it would probably be around 600 million.
Okay. Okay. And the ground lease, what happens with the ground lease, just from a general perspective?
Yeah, maybe I was a little bit too cute by half on that. So one of the things we need to have serious discussions with city council is essentially terminating that ground lease and providing the ability for the private sector to acquire fee simple interest in the real estate going forward. Now, Whether or not that is exchanged at a market rate for the city, or if there's some type of discount that the city provides on the ground to incentivize the development that the city wants, that's all still in front of us. But we won't get the type of redevelopment here without that conversation. And ultimately, if council chooses to do that, then we're off to the races. If the 75-year ground lease cannot go away, we'll be very challenged to attract some of those seminal uses I talked about. Housing won't come here. The hotel won't come here, because those are 70, 80, 90-year investments in terms of their life cycle. And it's a different context than retailers going on a long-term ground lease, because they know they'll be there 30 or 40 years. They know they won't be there 50, 60, 70 years. So it's a different construct of what we're talking about going forward. So, council's very much aware of that decision will be theirs ultimately. And we kind of got them to some threshold around that, but they didn't ultimately say, yeah, that's what we want to do. But, it's a function of what would we get? What would the community get out of this? And if it's enough of a return, both financially and also just as a place, then maybe they're willing to pull the trigger and go forward on that basis. But without it, I want everybody's eyes to be open. It'll be tough. The thing we want the least is for that special servicer to make the decision that, all right, I still have 52 years on my ground lease. My bondholders have that. I can just go out and get whatever stores will go into those places. And it's operating income. There are investors out there that'll buy it. That's a terrible outcome for the city, because then we've lost an opportunity for 10 to 20 years at a minimum.
And
We don't
certainly,
want that to happen.
sure. And certainly the land that we have here is invaluable from long-term development perspective.
But for the next 52 years, the city or EVE doesn't have a say. So that's why we're working really closely with that special servicer. They're in Miami
Okay.
to be a partner. And I'll give them a lot of credit. They're very much willing to be a partner, because they see a lot more upside of selling to, that type of redevelopment that I'm talking about versus just selling it for operating income. It's well over twice the amount of money that they could return to their bondholders.
Thanks for that. I'm going to read the Economic Development Strategic Plan. And I also appreciate that you all have been working with the Walk and Wheel program and just various other things that make our city accessible, especially as times are changing and people maybe hopefully move away from cars a little bit and ride the train more and what have you. So,
And a lot of what we're working on in our development code is making the community more walkable and connected that way too. So that when people come in for projects, we're saying, build this type of infrastructure, at least on your site, so we can eventually connect these places together.
it's great. Well, I'm glad we have you and I'll look forward to following this.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Anybody on the phone?
Nothing from me.
Okay. Well, I think that looks like Josh had dropped. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you. I
Appreciate your
appreciate the
That
time.
was really good. That was really helpful. Awesome. Yeah. And I
That
think
was my last slide, wasn't it?
Thanks.
we appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for the time.
Great, thank
Enjoy the
you.
rest of your evening.
Thanks.
So our next, let's see, going on to members' choice. So next meeting, December 20th. I guess let us know if that's going to be a challenge with anyone. Maybe weeks, some folks are gone. I can send out an email or something and kind of prompt, make sure it's okay with everybody. But let's see, we have a city attorney next round.
City
And
attorney
administration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Administration, yeah.
So that'll be a good one. Any other topics for today? Does anybody have anything? Anybody on the phone? Okay, well then I think we're adjourned for tonight. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy
Thank
Thanksgiving.
you.
Yes, happy
Good
holidays.
night.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Okay. was an awesome presentation.
Yeah,
Like all the other groups, I mean, I feel like everyone,
they know
Yes.
what they are doing.
yeah, and they're passionate about the city.
Yeah,
I mean, goodness, that's the best thing you can have right there.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, you can feel it when everyone talks, which is nice.